Episode 5 opens into Yang's nightmare of Adam, and flows smoothly through her talk with Tai, Port, and Oobleck. Honestly, this scene is one of the best in the series as it handles a delicate subject matter realistically and depicts the kind of kick in the ass Yang needs in order to get out of her depression and back into the world. We only need small tweaks, like having Port mention the slow but inevitable reclamation of Beacon moving at a steady pace, and more than half of the grounds have been recovered and secured under Glinda's round-the-clock leadership, much of which has been done in the last month alone. There's also passing mention of Coffee asking Yang about her well-being and sending their well wishes to her. But other than those small adds, this scene carries on just like before. We swap over to Ranger in good spirits as they're traveling along a cliffside, on the other side of which is Xi'an, where they're eager to spend the night in the comfort of an inn before the train from Mistral arrives. We get the stray comments about John's family visits to Xi'an since it's a popular spa town, as well as the anecdotes about the shenanigans involving his sisters. They stop when they round the cliff and see smoke drifting on the wind. They all rush forward and find Xi'an burning to the ground with bodies scattered this way and that. When they find the dying huntsman, he explains that a horde of Grimm tried to break through the eastern wall, and while the guards and huntsmen were distracted with that, bandits swooped in from the west and raided the whole town. In the chaos, the Grimm finally broke through, leading to the whole town being slaughtered. John orders Nora to start getting out their first aid supplies. Ruby looks at the man's wounds and then to John, suggesting they carry him to the train station, hole up there and wait for the train from Mistral to get them out of there. Unfortunately, the man rejects the idea, as Mistral was notified about the attack and the train's not coming. In fact, in light of the attack at Xi'an and Himawari, train services have been temporarily suspended until the tracks and their connecting towns can be fully reinforced. The last train has already been turned around and pointed back at Mistral. John chokes back a curse and turns to Ruby, fumbling for the map and suggesting they patch the huntsman up and set out for Hikimbana. It's about a 2 weeks walk, but if they ration their resources, they can make it in time. Just as Nora is handing John some gauze and bandages, Ren stops him and motions to the huntsman, who has stopped moving completely. The four grit their teeth over the loss and Ruby closes the man's eyes. Nora asks if they should bury him, but Ren suggests just leaving, which makes everyone uncomfortable even if they end up agreeing. Nora follows after Ren, concerned, and while Ruby tries to assure John that things will be okay, it's clear they're both stressed out over what they're seeing, especially because they both remark Mistral closing its train lines down altogether doesn't make a lot of sense to them. This is when Ren and Nora, while exiting the village, spot the hoof print in the mud and share knowing glances to each other. The last part of the episode is Yang emerging from her front door with the arm on, and Tai saying, "It's time to begin." And by that, I mean, time to begin listing all of these new patrons I've gotten. Holy crap, guys, this is an insane amount of people! I'd like to welcome Nikhil Kapoor, Zombie Guy, Dark Shallow 1, Gomez, William 12718, Trex, Porpora Casca, Sam Little, Cuppa Joe, and Arctic Sentry to the bonfire. It's patrons like you guys who keep this channel afloat and strong, and help make these videos possible. That goes for every single one of my patrons, and hopefully you all get your bang for your buck. Remember that for $1 or more you get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server where I, as well as other YouTubers such as Fatman Falling and Dashi Lee, regularly interact with our fans. Additionally, the first time you sign up, you'll get a shoutout in my next fully produced video, such as a review or the Fixing Ruby series. If you haven't already, please consider signing up. I could certainly use the support, and I'd love to see you all in the Discord. Now, on with the show! We open the next episode on Blake's conversation with Callie, where she's encouraged to talk with her father. Once done imparting her advice, Callie goes off to make babies with Sun, or whatever she was doing in that scene, and Blake heads inside to talk with her dad. She goes in, and the same awkward conversation ensues. Sans comments about the stomach armor because our new character design has, at least to some degree, mitigated what would prompt that comment. Again, Gira is incredibly understanding about Blake's concerns towards her parents when she lists, in broad strokes, all the horrible things she did while running away with the White Fang. Even when she breaks down about falling down the wrong path, he props her back up by mentioning how she found her way out, how she did the right thing in the end time after time, at least if what her and Sun have told him is true. Now, instead of getting interrupted by Sun, we actually get to dive into when Blake is asked why she left Beacon, and Blake recoils at the question. She admits that she was just Scared. She was scared and panicked, and the only thing that made sense was to go home, the last place she thought she might feel safe. There's more, she admits, but that's why she chose Menagerie. The rest, she reserves to tell him later, not quite ready to talk about it with someone who wasn't at the fall. He understands and he offers his daughter a hug, receiving one in return. When they pull away, he asks if she has thought about what she'll be doing while she's in town. He's more than willing to lend her and her friend a roof to stay under, but he suggests that getting some kind of work might help her work through things. Blake sits quietly for a moment, reflecting on her lack of professional training or experience, since she didn't exactly get to finish her schooling. Gira suggests the Kuokwana City Guard since it'll employ most of the things she's learned about while not being quite full-time huntress work. When she looks at him, skeptical about the idea, he says that he'll pull some strings with some friends in the force to keep her off the wall. She won't have to see a Grimm as long as he has anything to say about it. Blake hesitates for one more minute and goes to agree, only for Sun to knock down the door and ruin the moment. Unlike in the original, we're cutting before Gira can really make any comments because they tried to turn "I really don't like you" into a running gag, and I thought that it was a little too much comedy for this particular scene. Following this, we cut to the argument between Ironwood and Jock. Again, this is a decent scene, and the content only needs a bit of a touch-up to match the revised prior events and events to come, with Ironwood being frustrated about Jock's outspoken resistance to the dust embargo, clarifying the level of public disapproval there is towards it, and changing the council to the Atlesian Roundtable like before. The major changes come when Ironwood offers Weiss a position in Atlas. He tacks on that Winter speaks very highly of her sister before leaving, and that comes into play almost immediately when Weiss politely but firmly refuses Jock's request that she sing at the next gala he's hosting. Jock mulls over her rejection before he slaps an offer right back in her face, saying that he may just be able to arrange some time off for her sister to spend time at home, where she'd be welcomed back with open arms for a temporary amount of time. He's pretty sure that the general would be willing to trade anything for Jock's silence on the embargo for a month, and a week of shore leave for Winter would certainly be on the table. She deserves it, of course, after all the hard work she's done in Mistral. Reading Weiss like a book, he shrugs, saying singing a song or two might be a small price to pay to see her sister for a little while unimpeded. Weiss bites her lip over the request and frowns. After a few seconds, she composes herself and asks if her dad really wants her to sing that badly, and he says that he does. Sighing, and drawing her face into a leer, she says, "Fine. I get to see Winter, and I'll sing. But I'm choosing the music." He waves her off, saying as long as it's agreeable to the audience, he doesn't quite care. It's all to please the crowd after all. She leaves as she has the cute little scene with Klein outside, and we cut away. "In and out, Morty, 20-minute fix and we're done." In a Mistralian bar, we find Sienna calmly sipping on a mug of ale. Adam walks into the room and she waves him over. He goes over to her table and quietly stares at her, giving the bar a once-over. She assures him that this bar in particular is a friend of the Fang. Adam, still wary, sits across from Sienna and accepts the mug she passes to him. He asks why she asked him out there. She made it pretty clear she was furious with him. She sighs, pushing her mug to the side. She admits that she was harsh on him, but asks if he understands why she was so harsh. The attack at Beacon left what little goodwill the White Fang had in Vale at an all-time low. She adored Onryu and his leadership, and she respected his decisions, but the attack was too much too quickly. Sure, the White Fang wants to bring the fauna suppression to the forefront, but going all in on the violence angle puts the White Fang in the crosshairs of the kingdoms and law enforcement. Before, they were skirting the edges of just being noticeable enough, but now there's an active headhunt for any members of Vale's White Fang faction. Denouncing their actions was the only way to save the rest of the organization from similar levels of persecution. Adam growls that she made them the scapegoats, but she emphatically defends that the decision that she made was the only one that could be made in order to save the Fang. She points to Adam and says that his cell put the entire organization in a spot that they couldn't just wiggle out of. Things would have been fine if they stuck to their robberies and civil disobedience like they were instructed. This is one of the reasons why she demoted him. She knows how passionate he is, but she can't just have him running off on his own anymore, especially because she suspects that he was much more involved in the Vale plot than he admits. She's been busy getting parts moving around the globe in tandem with her PR control efforts. Protests in Vale, recruitment drives in Vacuo, political advocacy in Menagerie. Heck, she's gotten some of the top hunters in Mistral into her pocket, and she even found someone in Atlas with political aspirations. Overall, she set the White Fang on the track for a globe-spanning shift within the next decade. Adam tightens his grip on his mug, breaking it. He hisses that it's too slow, that they were making much faster progress before. Sienna just calmly points out, slow and steady wins the race. This isn't a war. You can fight a kingdom, maybe two, but you can't fight the whole world without a plan and expect to win. Adam says nothing and stands. Sienna says that she values him, but he needs to keep his temper in check and realize when slowing down is the best option. He says that, with all due respect, he prefers not to be the one doing catch-up when they're already so far behind. Sienna just frowns at him as he walks into the night, ending the episode. Episode 7 begins with Ruby waking up to Pyrrha's voice. Like in the original volume, she finds John practicing. She watches for a time, letting Pyrrha give her words of admiration and encouragement, and in a cutaway we see Nora in her sleeping bag, listening, barely able to hear the voice in the distance. Awake and seemingly upset at hearing Pyrrha's voice, Nora curls in on herself and takes a deep breath, closing her eyes to force herself back to sleep. Back with Ruby, she begins to tear up hearing Pyrrha's voice again, and with this, she accidentally outs herself to Jean. He looks over at her and leaves the recording running as he approaches her. They share teary-eyed looks, unable to say anything to each other. He laughs off the recording, saying it's old stuff he's already familiar with, but the new sword has a different weight to it and he just wanted to hear Pyrrha's voice again. Ruby responds weakly that it's like she's still with them that way, and John nods, affirming that he believes that she still is. He was never the most religious person, but he says that he can feel it, that she's still watching over them. Ruby laughs that Pyrrha always did have John's back and wipes away some of her tears. As she says this, we're treated to brief clips of Pyrrha and John together while Ruby was present, and Ruby's eyes actually flicker for a moment. Caught off guard, Ruby is stunned, and John asks what just happened. Ruby, unable to answer herself, begins to breathe a little harder, saying she doesn't know. John curses about how much they don't know, that there's so little they can prepare for. He just wants to find the people that did this, all of this, and make them pay for what they did and end the mess entirely. Ruby assures them that they'll figure things out. Times are tough, they're confused, but as long as they have each other, they'll make it through. When the conversation fails to continue, she ends it herself, suggesting that she get back to bed. John looks back at the recording that's still playing and says it's probably a good idea. He sees Ruby off and then drops back into position as Pyrrha begins to tell him to strike again and again and again. As John's blade comes down, we transition into the middle of the cut with Adam, who's practicing with his blade in what appears to be a retrofitted practice hall in the conquered villa. We hear whispers of Blake's voice, almost too quiet to perceive, that spur Adam into more violent strikes. After exhausting himself, Ilya appears behind him and makes herself known by commenting how ragged he looks. He sheathes his sword and says that he's run that way by his new quote-unquote superior. If he had to guess, Sienna had them under orders to work him hard, so he quit the White Fang voluntarily. He smirks, saying, "As if I'd give her the satisfaction. I want the humans to pay more than I am miserable." Ilya is quiet, not really commenting for or against the statement. Instead, she finally asks why Blake left. Adam pauses in the middle of cleaning up equipment around the room. Finally getting his bearings, he says matter-of-factly that Blake was weak-willed. Unspoken, they both saw where the White Fang was headed, what needed to be done, but when the time came, only he had the will to pull the trigger. In many ways, he relates it to Sienna's paradigm shift for the group. Aggressive protests, limited, quiet assassinations, and propaganda campaigns. All of it is garbage if no one listens. Under Onryo, they've been making progress, but with Sienna, they're taking steps back. Blake is worse, he says. She didn't just start advocating peace for humans, but started working with them. She had her head so filled with lies that she's just another puppet on the string for the humans to parade around, just like her father before her. He thought her turning her back on her family meant that she was immune, but he thought wrong, and he blames himself for not protecting her better from the filth. He actually chokes a little bit at that, whispering again to himself that it's his fault before becoming composed. Ilya folds in on herself, still in a modicum of shock over hearing Blake's defection. She voices that after everything Ilya had warned her about how cruel humans could be, after Ilya told her about her parents, Blake would understand that peace with humans needed to be fought for, not negotiated. Adam expresses relief to be in the room with someone that understands. He admits that they never really saw eye to eye on things, but knowing he's not alone is some comfort. Ilya laughs that maybe it's because they're so similar. Like personalities can be like the polar ends of a magnet and repel each other. Maybe they understand each other a little too well. Adam reflects on those words and asks how the response has been to Sienna's coup. Ilya gives a mixed response, saying that there's more than enough that want to follow the less overt direction Sienna has charted them for, but there's a growing number that still believe Onryo was leading them down a more successful avenue. Adam nods and says that in time the White Fang will need to reassert itself on the world stage if they're ever to make any kind of progress, and he hopes that Ilya is there alongside him to see it through. They both pause, Adam expecting her to say something, and Ilya simply hesitates to respond. And then quietly, Adam walks out of the room without hearing if she decides to respond at all. Focusing on his feet walking, we transition to Blake, doing her rounds while dressed in that snazzy guard armor that we got a good look at in Volume 5. Accompanying her is that Cat Faunus guard that everyone fell in love with. They end up at the town guard's headquarters, and the other guard bids Blake farewell as she heads into the lockers while Blake goes to give the report to the superior. She's called in by Saber Rodentia, a character I didn't even remember from Volume 5, let alone knew had a name, who apparently is this guy who is the captain of the guard. Blake gives a basic report where the only thing of note was them stopping a pickpocket kid who they decided to let go with a warning. Saber is amused by this, but doesn't quite look up from his notes. Instead, he asks Blake how long she's been in the guard now. A month and a half? Establishing that a bit of time has passed since we last saw her. Blake confirms it'll be 2 months next week, and he nods at that. He asks how she's liking it, and she responds that it feels nice to help people even if the work is a little dry. It's peaceful. He chuckles, since the more exciting work is along the wall. He continues that Blake is exemplary at the job, especially compared to that friend who joined with her, who's been too lackadaisical for Saber's taste. But he also notes that the reports that he's read have mentioned how reclusive Blake is. She helps out, she does her duty, but she never quite seems all there when on duty. So he asks again, is she happy being in the guard? Blake raises a brow and asks who's really asking. Saber or her dad? He levels a stare at her, crossing his arms, asking if it's really that hard to believe he's genuinely concerned over his subordinate. She perks a brow and immediately points to his snide remark towards Sun not a minute earlier, to which he defends that the boy thinks he's being endearing with his shenanigans, but Saber largely agrees with Gira on him being an irritation. Before their conversation can continue, the cat guard comes bursting through the door, half-armored, panting. She quickly tells about a breach in the southern wall not too far from where the guard post is. The town guard managed to seal it, but a Deathstalker managed to break through and they're having problems taking it out. Saber attaches his sword to his belt and tells the cat to get her armor back on. He spares a glance to Blake, who is frozen on the spot, but ultimately decides to go on wordlessly without her. Blake, however, grabs his hand and holds him in place even though she's trembling. She explains that she's dealt with Deathstalkers before, insisting that she can handle this. She cuts Saber off from asking questions, insisting again that she can do this. He finally nods and motions for her to follow. They rush out to the streets, and we cut to when they arrive at a roadway where the other guards are trying to contain the scorpion like one would a wild bull. That is to say, they're doing it poorly. Now again, going broad strokes on the details of the fight here, we have Saber getting knocked out of commission, the other guards being basically ineffective at slowing the thing down, and Blake being left to 1v1 the Deathstalker. At some point, her helmet is knocked off, and near the latter half of the fight, she uses her semblance to trick the Grimm into stabbing an electrical cable box, giving it a hearty shock. With the tail locked in place, she uses the ribbon on Gamble's shroud to sever the Deathstalker's stinger, which leaves it stumbling. With it wounded, she sneaks into its blind spot and severs both of its claws in sequence before cutting its legs out from under it. With the creature basically undeciplegic, Blake calmly walks up to its still living head and impales it on a wide section of Gamble's shroud. She pulls her blade free just as several civilians begin snapping pictures and cheering for her heroics. A second later, Sun arrives, breathing heavily that he came to help Blake before petering off when he realizes the Deathstalker is already dead. She turns just to smile at Sun, a full-toothed, genuine smile that is observed by Saber from afar. He shakes his head and laughs as the screen goes black, stating, "So that's how it is," as the episode ends. Episode 8 opens with Yang and Neptune sitting out an outdoor bench of a clinic, with Yang removing her arm and putting it away after what looks like a hefty workout. The two are talking casually about different motorcycles and other such shop talk, with Yang getting defensive when Neptune says that her bike is quickly going out of date. She says he better be careful with its words or she'll put him out of date, to which he turns around and asks for a date instead. Yang rolls her eyes and pushes Neptune away with a laugh, telling Casanova to tell it to someone that doesn't know he still needs floaties when going into a pool. Neptune curses to himself when he agreed to try swimming therapy. Yang just smiles and says, "I mean, it helped, didn't it?" Neptune gets up on a pair of crutches, looks at them, and agrees. He says goodbye and departs, and that's when Tai walks in, having watched the conversation. He comments how happy she looks and how well it seems to be going along now that she's been getting therapy going, and she responds that yeah, things do feel better. Almost normal. Almost. She looks down at her stump with that. Tai sits down next to her and rests a hand on her shoulder, saying that he's proud of her for just making it this far. She's resilient, and he knows that she can make it through anything. It's one of the best traits she seemed to have inherited from her mother. Yang's face kinda scrunches up before she breathes out and says, "So now we can talk about her?" Tai hesitates but nods and shoots back he has been informed she's an adult now, a nod back to the earlier scene with Port and Oobleck. He continues, noting that both of them take a problem head-on and tackle it full force in order to solve it. All it takes for them is to get pointed in the right direction and they just bowl the problem over. But he doesn't want her to be so much like her mother. Running headfirst into a wall isn't always the best option, and Raven struggled with it. Like, settling down. Her nature of just beelining for the simplest solution ended up hurting all of Strike, hurting the whole family. Yang mumbles out that Raven didn't want a kid, but Tai shakes his head that it wasn't the case. She loved Yang, but she also loved her tribe. Tai fought to keep Yang, and ultimately, he won out, with Raven leaving them both behind. Yang pauses before her voice rises in surprise that Raven wanted her. That Tai kept her from Raven. Tai is quick to shoot down Yang's phrasing. With him, she had somewhat of a normal life, and he wanted that for Raven too. She rejected him at every turn, and if he had let Raven take Yang, she'd be out there today pillaging hapless towns. Yang is quick to argue that Tai could have gone with Raven, only for Tai to turn around and ask if he should have become a bandit, if he should have raised her around thugs and criminals. He loved her mother, and he learned to look beyond her past, but he was hoping to drag her out of that mess, not get dragged into it himself, much less get his own flesh and blood involved. Yang is trembling now, unable to process the information as she says it wasn't his choice to make, to which he snaps, "Like hell it wasn't, I'm your father, and I put my foot down when your life got put in danger. It's why I kept telling you not to go after her. Your mother isn't a good person, Yang. I don't want you to become like her. That's why I was hoping more of Summer would have rubbed off on you." Yang says that he can't know how well she would have turned out with Raven. Maybe actually knowing her mother would mean that she didn't have as many issues as she does now. Tai is quick to shoot her down there, telling her to think about it. If she had gone with Raven, she would have never known her father, never known her sister, probably never known Crow considering how well the two got along when Raven left. Yang folds a little into herself when the notion hits her. He continues that Yang would have never grown up with all of her friends that she had, with all the friends that she has now from Beacon. Raven offered a tribe. Tai offered a home, and damn it, he made the right call. He was hoping Yang would have more common sense during this discussion, but he blames himself for being too scared to broach it properly after she pulled the stunt she did when Ruby and her were children. Yang stands up, her arms case in hand, and her eyes cast to the side. She's shaking at this point, and after a moment of speechlessness, fumbles saying, "We're done for today," before walking off. Tai watches her go and sighs, looking to the sky and saying, "Yep, just like her mother," as we get a smooth transition from Vale Sky to Mistrals. We pan down to find Ranger traveling to Higanbana, and unlike almost everything that came before this scene is 99% untouched up through the conversation with Raven. Only two things of note here. Ruby makes mention of how relieved she is she can recharge her scrolls since it and everyone else's scrolls died so she couldn't play her favorite games in her free time. And we get our first ever mention of Salem in this entirety of the fic scene. Theoretically, we're just gonna let that name simmer in the background for people to speculate over without much elaboration in this season. After Crow orders a double, we do a camera truck past the waitress so we can transition to the barracks of the White Fang base, where a Mook is handing Adam a newspaper. Scrawled prominently on the Menagerie Mirror is a front-page article about the wall breach and the brave efforts of a new guard recruit Blake Belladonna in repelling the invading Deathstalker with minimal casualties. Adam scowls at the paper, at least as well as one can scowl through a mask like that, and crushes it, ending the episode. Episode 9 opens with a window sliding closed. We find the young Remus sneaking into a room and pulling up a chair next to a bedridden Aventine. The girl is pale, and while she's supposedly unconscious, her eyes are half-lidded. Remus begins talking to her softly, saying he'd heard that she wasn't well and the adults wouldn't let him see her. He says things have been weird around the farm, and he can't quite put his finger on why. Everyone seems off. He even feels weird himself, like sometimes he just doesn't care about things. That's why he became scared, so he came to check on Aventine. She doesn't respond, but there's a racket downstairs. Remus goes to the door and cracks it, listening out to a group of adults arguing about something just out of earshot. A few scattered words can be heard, some in concerned, even angry voices, some in decidedly apathetic tones. Through the door slit, we can see a man dressed in what appears to be huntsman garb, heading to the door, clearly stating he's going to check out the well and see what the hell is going on. Remus pulls back and closes the door, returning to sit beside Ave. He touches her hand, saying that he hopes that she gets better soon, only for her to blink awake and start to cry in pain, a cry that should be familiar to those paying attention to the Fixing series. The adults hear the crying and burst into the room while Remus apologizes profusely to Ave if he hurt her. They scold young Remus Putnam, dragging him out of the room as we get one last shot of Ave Brunswick crying. We transition over the crying with Weiss's singing, diving right into her gala performance for Jacques. This is another segment completely unchanged except for one camera angle at the conclusion of Weiss's song where she reacts with bafflement over the crowd's reaction to her singing. She literally just sang the "My Dad is an Asshole" song and no one cared. This will be important in the following scene, which happens unhindered with Weiss meeting Henry Marigold, her breakdown over how shallow the gala and the people actually are, her summoning the Borbotusk to attack the lady who blamed Vale for the fall of Beacon, and Ironwood showing up to bamf that summon into next week. When that's done, we transition over to Adam walking into the White Fang throne room. He approaches Sienna and inquires about her sending a new team to Menagerie to assist Fennec and Corsic in managing PR among Menagerie's citizens. Sienna looks to him warily and asks why he would want to go to that position, to which he responds that Fennec and Corsic are old friends, and after the disaster at Beacon where one of his friends defected and where another was killed, he suggested keeping close to his friends has become important to him. Sienna quickly shoots through his flimsy excuse, wondering if maybe the real reason he wants to go is because the defector he mentioned, Blake Belladonna, has just outed herself there and he wanted some form of revenge. No, he's already on a tight leash and he's staying that way. Even then, she's already chosen a candidate, and that's when Ilya enters the room asking politely why Sienna wanted to see her. Sienna smiles and says that she's being sent to Menagerie to assist in the PR campaign. Adam looks over to Ilya, clearly livid. She gets Ilya caught up on the need to know, such as the fact that she'll be leaving in half a week before dismissing her. Sienna turns to address Adam, stating clearly that the Belladonnas are an important ally in reclaiming the credibility of the White Fang as a civil rights organization, and any personal vendetta with Blake should be shelved, or perhaps she'll have to reconsider her decision to keep him around. Adam growls, but Sienna cuts him off, frowning at him. She says that she's disappointed in him, that he had such a way of leading people and he squandered it being petty. She tells him to leave, and he complies, obviously angry as he stomps out the door. In our stinger, we get a new mysterious character, Tyrion Kalos, arriving at Higginbottom, asking where a particular person is, presumably a member of Juniper or Crow. And we'll leave it there for today. I'd like to thank everyone for watching this second installment, and I hope you'll return when I release the next one, hopefully within some kind of timely fashion. Remember, if you like my take on RWBY, you should subscribe to the channel, ring that bell, and pass this video series on to any friends you may think might like it. And of course, don't forget to follow me on my Patreon. For $1 or more, you get access to the Team Frostbite Discord server, The Tundra, where I, as well as other YouTubers such as Fatman Falling and Dashy Lee, interact with our followers on the regular. Remember to also follow me on Twitter for the newest updates to my channel and all the content I'll be covering going forward. One more note, I do have a book, Forged Within Flames, an interconnected series of short stories available now in digital and print on Amazon. Please give it a look if you ever feel up to it. But that's enough for now. I'll catch you all in the next episode.